Bailiff, if you'd bring jurors, please.
Your Honor, if we may be
Yes.
heard,
Hold
before
on
they
one
come
moment.
out.
Go ahead.
Kathy Sue Hall from Child Protective Services, our next witness. Just as as part of their standard procedures, we have her reports. They have been turned over, but in terms of making a disclosure as to who made the initial report in a case such as this, there needs to be an order from the court. And if you'd like to address that with her now before the jury comes out, that's
I can do that now, or we can do it in the midst of her testimony, either way.
If we can go ahead and do it now,
That's fine. Miss Sudhall, if you'll go ahead and just take the seat up here. Yeah, no, she doesn't need to be sworn in for this. All right, Ms. Sudhall, I understand that you, under state law, a disclosure has been made to you regarding potential abuse or neglect of a child. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, and under state law, the identity of that individual who makes the disclosure is protected. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, and I'm going to find that in the interest of justice, I'm going to order that the identity of the disclosing parties be revealed during your testimony.
Yes, sir.
Is that sufficient for you?
Yes, sir.
All right, very well. You can keep your seat. We'll
Thank
just
you.
bring the jurors in.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the state will call Ms. Kathy Sue Hall to the stand.
I solemnly swear the testimony you give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Waller?
Thank you, sir. Ms. Sue Hall, good morning to you, ma'am.
Good morning.
Will you please state your name for the record?
Kathy Sudhall.
And can you spell your last name for us, please?
Sutehall.
All right. And thank you, ma'am. Ms. Sue Hall, how are you employed?
I am no longer employed. I retired in June.
All right. And congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You retired in June of 2016.
Yes, sir.
So prior to that, ma'am, how were you employed before you retired in June of 2016?
I was an assessment worker with Wake County Human Services, Child Protective Services.
Okay. And when you say an assessment worker, is that in kind of very generic terms, would that be a social worker? Or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about what your duties and responsibilities were as an assessment worker with Child Protective Services?
Reports would come in alleging that a child or children were abused, neglected, or dependent. It was my responsibility to respond to those reports and determine whether or not that had happened, and if any other abuse or neglect had happened, and make a determination as to what needed to happen with the family in order to make sure the children were safe.
And when you say you respond to an incident, tell us a little bit about what the different ways are that you can respond to an incident.
Our response time frame is anywhere from immediately, which means the children are in immediate danger, critical danger, and we would go out immediately, to 24 hours, which is typically an abuse case or a case where there is some kind of physical injury to a child, often a bruise of some kind, so that we can see the bruise before it goes away. Or a 72-hour response would be a neglect response, where there's no actual injury to the child, but the circumstances therein require us to look into.
And when you say you go to different locations, do you actually go to homes, schools, or wherever you need to go to investigate?
Yes, sir.
And CPS, or Child Protective Services in general, that's a large agency, is that?
It is very large.
Tell us a little bit about what the duties Child Protective Services have in general.
The agency is a county agency. Each agency in North Carolina is run by the county with state oversight. Our responsibility, as I said, is to make sure that watch for the protection of children. If there's anyone who has any concern about a child, they either call in, sometimes they will write in, send a fax, stating what their concerns are. There is a state mandate. If those allegations meet a certain criteria, then a case is opened on that family. And again, it would start with an assessment worker. Our response would be anywhere from immediately to within 72 hours. If it's determined that there is abuse or neglect in the home that needs continued follow-up, in other words, it may require parents to take a parenting class or to get a child into therapy or to work with the family in getting their home repaired. It could be just about anything. Then it goes to what's called an in-home worker, and she or he would provide ongoing services. If the situation is critical enough, it's possible that we may file for temporary custody of the children, where they would come in our care and are either placed with family or in a foster care home.
And when did you start with CPS?
1990.
1990?
Yes, sir.
And were you an assessment worker your entire career with CPS, or did you have other jobs as well?
I did 4 years not quite 4 years as a foster care worker, but I went back to assessments.
Okay. And Ms. Holden, do me a little favor. If you just pull that microphone a little bit
Yes,
closer
sir.
to you. You're doing fine, but it's as we talk more, it may trail off on me, so just keep that close.
Okay.
Ms. Sue Hall, let me ask you about this case in general and about how you got involved, okay?
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the Holden and Taylor families back in 2014.
We received a neglect report on January 3rd of 2014 concerning Jeremy, which is what I call him, or JT, Amber Holden, Nautica Holden, and their parents, Latanya and Nathan Holden.
And you said that is one of the neglect reports, so would that have fallen within that 72-hour window
Yes, sir.
of response time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how was CPS notified of the potential neglect?
We received a fax from the clerk of court's office after Ms. Holden requested a domestic violence protective order.
And tell us a little bit about that. Is that an automatic procedure that, in terms of how CPS is notified if a domestic violence protective order is asked for?
The clerks will review the request and the subsequent temporary order to determine if there's anything to do with children. They don't make the decision about whether or not it's abuse or neglect. They simply fax it to the agency, and then the intake workers determine whether or not there is concerns for abuse or neglect within the situation that the parent has described in applying for the restraining order.
So, and we saw an example, I believe, yesterday of the DVPO that was filed in this case, and there was a box that can be checked about potential issues with the children. I guess if that box is checked, it automatically goes to an intake worker with your agency?
Yes, it doesn't have to have the box check if even in the narrative it expresses concerns, it would still come to us.
Okay. And were you the intake worker that reviewed the DVPO to start with, or was it passed on to you?
It was passed on to me.
And so did you have the opportunity to review the DVPO when it came to you?
I did, but the narrative in my report is essentially the narrative in the restraining order.
Okay. And what was the general nature of the claim that got your agency involved in assessing this situation?
Miss Allen had written that she had moved out of the house, and that her husband had continued to call her parents and to call her, that he was threatening to take her children, that he had attempted to come to her parents' home. Her father had called the police, that he had told her brother, which I believe is Sylvester Jr., that he was going to kill the children and himself, and that Mr. Holden threatened to punch Miss Allen and beat her son, and that he had actually beat her son with a broom.
And so there are several different.
Again, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, these statements that this witness are making are repeating statements made that were out of court, so you cannot accept them for the truth of what was said out of court and not under oath, but they are offered for the purposes of explaining what this witness did next. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, Ms. Sue Hall, there were several different allegations made in that claim, but there were several that particularly related to children. Is that right?
Correct.
And were there any of those claims that really were a priority to you as an agency in terms of you needing to get involved?
That Mr. Holden had beaten Jeremy with a broom, that he had made threats to kill himself and the children.
And would either one of those threats be a situation or a claim that would get CPS involved?
Most likely, yes.
After you reviewed that DVPO, what was your next step in terms of investigating these allegations?
When an assessment worker receives a call or a report from domestic court, which is where you file for the restraining order, there's a slightly different protocol in place. It's recognized that there may be danger to the family. There may be danger to the mother and the children if the family is interviewed together, which is what normally happens in a neglect report. We make a phone call, we go to the house, we interview everybody in the house together. But because the domestic violence protocol requires us to contact the person who filed for the restraining order, which was in this case Miss Allen, contact her first to schedule an appointment to meet with her and the children without Mr. Holden, so that we could make sure that there were safety plans in place to make sure the children and their mother was safe. So in this, go ahead.
Oh, please.
In this particular case, I contacted Miss Holden on the 3rd and explained to her why we had the report. She said that Jeremy was still in school. I asked for permission to see Jeremy at school, which she granted, and then we made arrangements for me to go to her parents' home, which is where she was staying, to interview her and the girls later in the afternoon.
And you said you try to do this within these interviews individually for safety concerns, but do you also find that if you do these interviews one-on-one that people are more candid in terms of the responses that they give?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Who did you meet with first, Ms. Sue Hall?
I went to Roseville High School where I met with Jeremy.
And in general terms, what did Jeremy tell you about the situation he was involved with?
I explained who I was and why I was there and asked him how long his parents had been separated. And he said he thought it was sometime around Christmas. He said that his mom had left and that he had stayed with his father. I asked him about the incident with the broom, and he said that it had happened one time, but that it was his fault, which is always concerning when a child feels.
Overruled.
it's concerning when a child feels that discipline is their fault, and especially any kind of harsh discipline. He said that he had been disrespectful to his father and that his father had beaten him with a broom. So I asked him where on his body that was, and he said pretty much all over except for his head. He said that it happened a couple of months ago, and he denied that his father had hit him anywhere else. I asked him why he lived with his dad, and he said that his dad and he needed each other. I asked him if he felt safe with his dad, and he said he did. And I asked him if he sees his mother, and he said he saw his mother whenever he wanted to.
And this was the first time you'd ever met with Jeremy or JT.
That's correct.
And since January 3rd of 2014, have you had the opportunity to meet with him several times up until April 9th of 2014?
Yes, sir.
Or did you have the opportunity, I should
Yes,
say?
sir.
And this, he said in that statement, he mentioned wanting to be with his father, feeling like he needed to be with his father. Is that something that you observed about him the entire time you were meeting with Jeremy over this 4-month period?
Jeremy appeared to be very torn about his parents. He loved both of them very much. He felt very torn about living with his mom and living with his dad. I think he felt that his mom had her parents, so that she had support, and that if he lived with his father, then he would be the support for his father, which needs to be the other way around in a family. It needs to be the father supporting the child.
And you mentioned you had some concern about him saying that he blamed himself for the broom incident. Was that part of the emotions that you saw Jeremy displaying during this time period?
Yes, sir.
Now, Ms. Suha, I think you said that conversation happened at the high school.
Yes, sir.
After having that conversation with him, did you have any concerns about Jeremy's safety at either one of his parents' house at that point?
My concern was that the domestic violence restraining order gave temporary custody to Ms. Holden, and yet she did not have all 3 of her children with her from the court order. So when I went to speak with her later that afternoon, I explained to her that because the court had ordered that the children stay with her during this time period, that she had to get Jeremy back.
And these domestic violence protective orders that are filed and grant custody to one party of the children, is it always that one party gets all the children, or can it be a situation where one party has the son and one party has the daughter?
It can be separate, but initially when a parent applies for the restraining order ex parte, then almost always, if she or he is granted custody, it is of all the children, almost always.
So when you found out through talking with Jeremy that he was still with his dad, that was a concern to you based on the order that was in place at that point?
Correct.
Okay. And so at that point, did you leave the high school and I think you said you went and talked to LaTanya?
I did.
Okay. Where did you meet with her?
At her parents' home.
Okay. And besides LaTanya, were there any other people present at that point?
Her girls, Amber and Nautica, her mother, Angelia Taylor, was there. And I don't believe her father was there, if I recall.
Let's start with her mother, Angelia Taylor. Did you interview her at that point, or find any need to interview her at that point?
I didn't. She introduced herself to me, and I believe she stayed in a back room while I interviewed the girls and their mother.
In the brief period of time that you met with Angelia, was it pleasant conversation, or?
She was very pleasant.
And then the girls, did you interview them before or after you talked to LaTanya?
Before.
Okay. And I don't want you to tell me anything directly that they said, but the general nature of that conversation, did they appear to be happy and well taken care of?
They were.
All right, let's go to your conversation with LaTanya at that point. Can you tell us a little bit about what issues you addressed with her on January 3rd of 2014?
When I have a case that comes in through the clerk of courts, I explain what my role is in terms of child protective services, and also try to explain a little bit about the court process. I am not a lawyer. I make sure that folks know that I'm not a lawyer, but I'm old. I've been around a long time. I'm in court a lot, so I kind of explained to her what to expect she went to court. We are required to go to court in case the judge has any questions about the children.
Let me ask you about that, Ms. Suhal. You mentioned ex parte domestic violence protective orders, and Tanya explained that a little bit to us yesterday. But that's just when one of the people involved goes into court and goes in front of a judge. Is that right?
That's correct.
And at that point, because it is the very beginning, your agency is not involved at that point.
Not when she applied. Sometimes that we are involved, and we will encourage a parent to apply for an ex parte order. But in this particular case, I was not involved at that time.
Okay. And you said you explained the process to LaTanya, and was she aware that she was going to have to go back to court?
She was.
On January 9th, I
Correct.
believe, and apply for a more permanent
Correct.
restraining order.
That would be a hearing on the issues.
And is that the type of hearing that you would go to, Ms. Suhal, or do you just go to custody issues?
I go to the 10-day hearing for a restraining order. In this case, it was the January 9th court hearing. Sometimes I do go to custody court, especially if the safety of the children are involved.
So it's a fairly standard practice for you and your agency for assessment workers to be involved in court proceedings.
Correct.
And we're going to talk about some of the more proceedings in this case that you were present at, and that's pretty standard.
Yes, sir.
Or is standard.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry I interrupted you there talking about, you were explaining to LaTanya about the different court proceedings, and go from there.
I told her it's basically what to expect. I often will tell, especially women who apply for restraining orders, that sometimes they can call Interact, which is the domestic violence program in Raleigh. Sometimes there is a attorney available to help them through that court. So I explained that, and then we talked a little bit more about what had happened to before she decided to get the restraining order.
And did she tell you about what had led up to January 2nd, I guess?
She did.
What'd she tell you?
She said that, first of all, she said that Jeremy really didn't want to live with his dad, and that Mr. Holden had threatened to put him in a group home. However, she also said he didn't want his dad to be mad at him, which was very clear throughout my contact with this family, that Jeremy was so torn. She said that she got the restraining order the day before, after Mr. Holden had showed up at the school to try to get the girls out of school, and she was worried about that. She said that she went and picked up the girls and took them to her parents' house, and then went downtown to get the restraining order. Then she said that while she was at the courthouse, Mr. Holden texted her and told her that she could have the children, but then asked, "What floor are you on?" And she said that made it clear to her that he had followed her and knew that she was in the courthouse. She said that she left the courthouse immediately. She went to her car in the parking deck and then realized he had followed her there as well. So when she left the parking deck, she parked somewhere on the street and went into the sheriff's office, which is the building next door. She said that Mr. Holden caught up with her and threatened to punch her. I asked her if he had ever physically hurt her in the past, and she said he had not. She also said that on Wednesday, the Wednesday prior to my visit, that Mr. Holden had called and threatened to come and get the children, which concerned her.
And let me interrupt you there, Ms. Suhal. So that the Wednesday prior to, so on Wednesday, would that have been January 1st?
I believe it was.
Okay, and then, so January 2nd would have been Thursday, the day that she went and got the DVPO, and then Friday is the day you're having this conversation.
Correct.
So what I anticipate you're about to tell us about is our activities that would have happened on January 1st of 2014,
Yes, sir.
based on that timeline. Okay, thank you.
She said that he had fussed at her father, Sylvester Taylor, and her father had told him, if you come onto my property, I'm going to shoot you. And then her father called the police. She said that when she was talking to her husband at the sheriff's office, she finally told him she was tired of talking on the street and let's just go to a restaurant. And he agreed to do that. So she went to her car, and then a police officer called her and asked her where she was. She said
About what police officer that was at that time, Ms. Hall?
I don't have in my notes that she indicated. She just said a police officer had called her.
Okay, but it was clearly someone involved in law enforcement.
Correct. She said that the officer told her that Mr. Holden had contacted her brother Sylvester and was threatening to kill her and the children and then himself. So she said that the police officer told her to go to the nearest police station. So she returned to the sheriff's office, and she said an officer escorted her to get the restraining order. She also said that the police had apparently gone to her parents' house to let them know of the threat and then notified the school.
And you mentioned that her brother, Sylvester Taylor, is the one that had, I guess, let this information be known. Is that right?
Correct.
And did you follow up with Sylvester Taylor Jr. at any point and talk with him about this?
I don't believe I did. Things were kind of happening quickly with court, and we made sure that the children were safe and that she was safe. They knew how to get assistance immediately if they needed it, so I did not follow up with him right away.
Is he someone that you've known to be involved in this situation from January 2014, pretty much on until today?
Yes, sir.
Been actively involved with this
Yes,
family? After she told that information to you, did you have a discussion with her about her getting custody of Jeremy based on the domestic violence protective order?
Yes, I explained to her that that Jeremy had said that his father had beaten him with this broom until the broom actually broke, and that because she had temporary custody, she needed to get him back to her with her. So I explained to her the way to do it is to go to a road that was nearby the home that Mr. Holden and Jeremy were staying in, then call 911 to request a sheriff to come and escort them, have the court order, have the sheriff escort them to Mr. Holden's house in order to retrieve Jeremy, that she was not to go alone.
And did Miss Holden, or excuse me, LaTanya, say that she would follow those directives and try to get Jeremy back that way?
She did.
So it was the plan at that point to have law enforcement assist with returning Jeremy from the start.
That's correct.
And did you become aware that she did contact law enforcement to get Jeremy back, and that she eventually did get Jeremy back after having to have some law enforcement assistance?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's we'll move on to January 9th, and I believe that's when the domestic violence court hearing occurred. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And were you present for the hearing at that time?
Yes, sir.
And based on what LaTanya told us yesterday, the hearing didn't happen that day, but
Correct.
was continued.
Correct.
And is that your recollection as well?
Yes, sir.
Let's move to January 21st, and is that when the actual hearing on the domestic violence order took place?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And were you present for that case as well?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Hall, based on that hearing, is that the point where all children were to stay with LaTanya for the course of until permanent custody could be established?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it was your understanding that the three children would be with LaTanya during the week, and that the defendant would have visitation, I believe, every other weekend.
Yes, sir.
And was that something that you, as your agency, were comfortable with at that point and supported that position?
It was. I still hadn't had a chance to really interview Mr. Holden. I talked to him very briefly on the 9th. But the court ordered that there was to be no physical discipline of the children, so that made me a little bit more comfortable.
And you bring up a good point there, Ms. Sewell. Let me ask you about that. And, we've talked about LaTanya being involved in filing the order or restraining order to start with, and your follow-up with her. But is it also your agency's duty to follow up with the defendant in this case and the defendant in any situation where you're involved with?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you're not necessarily advocating for one side or the other. It's more about the safety of the children.
Correct.
Okay. The January 9th attempt to talk with Mr. Holden, was that in court?
Yes.
Okay. And so you didn't have a very long conversation with him there at that point at all?
Correct.
All right. Moving on to January 27th, did you become aware that on January 27th, that some things had happened that caused some issues with the custody arrangement?
Yes, sir.
All right. Tell us about that, Ms. Sewell.
I had received a call from Miss Allen, who said that her father had gone to pick up the children after their weekend visit with their father, and that she said half his family showed up with them and confronted Mr. Taylor, accusing, actually his father confronted Mr. Taylor, accusing him of trying to turn Jeremy against him and their family, and that now Jeremy was more confused than ever. Again, this going back and forth between his parents. She also said her father was afraid that the men that had come with Mr. Holden may have been carrying guns.
Sustain. The jury's to disregard.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. And so at that point, she outlined what had happened between Jeremy and, I guess, her father, Sylvester Taylor.
She did.
Okay. And based on that, did you give a recommendation to her as to some help that Jeremy could get?
I did.
What did you tell her that he could do?
There's a therapist that we often refer children to in Wendell called, her name is Sharon Hartzog, and I encouraged her to call Ms. Hartzog and see if she would be able to see Jeremy to help him with his feelings of being torn between his parents.
So you had that continuing concern at this point that
Yes, sir.
He was torn between his parents.
Yes, sir.
Now, after you learned about the incident through LaTanya as to what had happened between Jeremy and Sylvester Taylor, was it your, I guess, duty to follow up with JT?
Yes,
Okay, and did you in fact follow up with JT?
I did. I went to the school after I spoke with Miss Holden.
Okay, and what did JT tell you at that point it had happened?
I asked him what had happened over the weekend, particularly when his grandfather had come to pick them up, and he said that when his dad went to drop him off, his grandfather, he told his grandfather that this was all bull. I'm not sure quite what that meant. He said that his dad, his uncle, and his paternal grandfather kind of surrounded Mr. Taylor, so that after that happened, Mr. Taylor told all the children to get in the car, and he sped off. And I asked Jeremy if it was possible that his grandfather, Mr. Taylor, felt intimidated by his father's family, and he said he thought that that was possible, but that his father's family didn't mean anything by it. He said once they got to his grandfather's house, his grandfather told the girls to go inside, and told Jeremy to stay in the car. Then he said his grandfather grabbed his phone and slapped him and said, quote, "You set me up, nigger," unquote, over and over again. He said Jeremy sat in the car. His grandfather called a couple of people and said, "Your buddy set me up." He said, Jeremy said that he didn't know what his grandfather was talking about, or what any of that meant. He said that his grandfather kept cussing at him, and finally Jeremy got out of the car, went to the house to try to use the house phone. He said that he was trying to call his dad to tell him what had happened, but when his grandfather, that he was trying to tell his dad what had happened, and he said that he also called the police and went outside. When he was outside, he said his grandfather had come out with a gun and a belt. He said that his mom came home a few hours later and he told her what had happened, but Mr. Taylor kept talking over him, that he wasn't allowing Jeremy to say what had happened.
So this is when you talked to JT and Ms. Suthall, was this the first time you had heard about a gun being potentially involved in this incident?
Yes, sir.
And when you talked to LaTanya earlier that day, that she had not mentioned anything about a gun, but by being used by her father.
Correct.
All right. And what else did JT tell you at that point?
He said that he had been telling his mom over and over again that he wanted to stay with his dad because his dad teaches him things. I asked him what kind of things that his dad taught him, and he said he teaches me about finance and how to run a business.
And at that point, did you, because of the drop-offs, advise him that maybe have someone?
Yes, sir.
And also talk to him about maybe seeing Ms. Hartzog or another counselor to
I did.
help with some of these feelings?
Yes, sir.
Was JT receptive to that?
Yes, but I also order in place that nobody could violate, that it had been ordered that he remain, that this was the way things were going to work, figure out a way to live with it, and maybe a good way to do that was with Ms. Hartzog.
And Ms. Suthall, did JT seem with his mom? In other words, was he scared of staying with his mom and
Not
his
in any,
grandparents?
no, not in any way.
Okay, he was dad because of being the young man that he was and feeling torn like he was.
Yes, sir.
But he had about staying with his mom, or that he didn't love his mom.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to I guess January. Following up on January 20th, did you talk to Miss Holden, or excuse me, LaTanya, about what you'd learned from JT?
I did.
Okay, and what was her response to that?
I told her what Jeremy had told me to visit at the school, and that she said that her father was the one, Jeremy, and she said that she'd do anything to get. She said that he was even being aggressive towards her.
Okay. Yeah. And did she also say she was trying to keep him as active as possible?
She did. She said that she had gotten him into an after-school program with Jack, and that she was also getting him involved with the Boys and Girls Club.
Now, at that point, missed opportunity to contact the defendant or contact with the defendant about this case.
On the 9th in court, and talked a little bit about Jeremy being hit with a broom. And then I talked to him again by phone on January 27th.
And on January, the incident with him. I'm sorry, the January 26th incident.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. What were you telling Mr. Holden or the defendant that you needed to do at this point?
I told him that I would need to meet with him and I needed to come to his home.
And would Mr. Holden or the defendant allow you to meet with him at this point and come to his home?
Every time I talked to him, he kind of talked over me, so it was very difficult, but I never did get to meet with him in person and sit down and have a conversation with him.
And as part of your duties as a assessment worker, is that what you try to do, is go to someone's home and get a full view of the situation?
Correct.
Did you make any specific appointments to go to the defendant's home?
No.
Okay. At that point, after you had this conversation with him, did you then follow up with Taylor?
I did.
Okay, and how did you follow up with Sylvester Taylor?
I called him on the 27th, Miss Holden, his cell phone number, so I called him and told him what Jeremy and what Mr. Holden had said, and he had a gun in the car for protection, but that obviously he wasn't going to use it, and he also admitted to asking Jeremy to set him up with having so many family at the time when he was going to pick up the children. So I told him that I needed to come to the house to make sure that the children were, and we agreed that I would call him first thing in the morning to arrange a time to come over.
Right off the bat, this was the first time you'd ever talked to Sylvester Taylor, either in person or over the phone.
That's correct.
And he readily admitted that there was a gun in the car when he went to pick up Jeremy and the girls.
Correct.
But did he tell you that he brandished it in any way or showed it in any way there that afternoon?
He told me there was no way anyone could have seen it.
Okay. And that, I think he said it was in a bag.
Correct.
Or I'm sorry, that it was not in a bag, but it was between his seats.
It was down on the driver's side, on the left hand, almost under the seat.
And so, based on his admission to there being at least being a gun in the car, what did you feel like it was necessary for you and your agency to do?
We are required to make sure that guns are secure in a house where there's children. So I asked him if I could come and make sure that, and he readily agreed.
And so this may sound like a silly question, but there's no law for having guns in a house if children are present. Is that
correct?
Right? But as part of, especially if a case is open with your agency, you want to make sure that they're safe and that they're locked up properly and whatnot.
Correct.
And is that what you were going to do with Mr. Taylor and his family?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you able to do that there on the? You do it on a later date.
I called him on the morning of the 28th, and he agreed for me to come right over. It was in the morning, so I went there on the 28th.
Did he have any resistance to you coming to the house, or asked to put it off to a later date? Mr.
Absolutely not.
And I see here that you have noted that you visited on January. Even what time of the morning it was?
Pretty early, maybe around 8:30, I think.
Okay. All right, and then when you went over there to the Taylor residence, what did you find?
Mr. Taylor came out of the home and greeted me, and he immediately agreed to show me his guns. He said that he had one hand, and he showed it to me. It was in a black zippered bag down, like I said, on the side of the driver's seat. It was a silver automatic. I don't know guns, but he showed me the clip was out of it, which means the bullets were out of it, and that he also showed me that there was not a bullet in the chamber. And he also said that the keys are always on his body. He doesn't leave them out for children to be able to get to. And then he showed me 3 shotgun rifles, again, I don't know guns, that were in a cabinet in a locked shed property. So I told him that the guns are around the children, and he agreed.
Okay. And you said that he showed you where these keys to the cabinets that the gun was in?
Yes, sir. And to the car.
And to the car?
Yes, sir.
And the gun that you saw there in the car, you said you're not really familiar with firearms, but...
Yes, sir.
And in terms of Mr. Taylor's interactions around the gun, did he seem to be fairly familiar with guns to you?
I would say.
Okay. Knew the different parts, knew how to take them apart, obviously, with the magazine out and that,
yes, sir.
That kind of thing. Okay, based on again seeing that there were some guns there in the house, what did you want Mr. Taylor to do?
We signed a safety plan that said that there would not be.
And when you say not any weapons around the children, does that mean that they have to be off the premises completely, or could they be on the premises just in a safe location?
They could be on the premises, but had to be in a safe location and secure.
And based on what did you already have a feeling as to whether or not these guns were secured safely as they were?
I was a little concerned about the handgun at the side of his car, so we talked about him locking that up as well. But those in the shotguns in the shed in the back of the property were properly secured.
The gun out of the vehicle.
Yes, sir.
All right. And what else did you do on that home visit day there on January 28th?
We talked a little bit about what had happened when he had gone to pick up the children and what happened once they got home. And he said that Jeremy was calling his dad the whole time he was in the car, but he denied slapping him. He said that Jeremy then went into the house and got the house phone, so Mr. Taylor unplugged it because he felt that it would just stir up trouble, I think. Then Jeremy left the house. Mr. Taylor said that he had gone outside with a flashlight trying to find Jeremy, but he couldn't find him, so he called the police. And an officer, J.R. Edwards, had responded and had found Jeremy and essentially told him they just needed to stay away from each other.
So at that point, Ms. Suit Hall, you talked to Jeremy, and he had alleged that a gun was present. Did you confront Mr. Taylor about that day?
I did, and again, he denied that he had slapped him or denied that he had any weapon.
So on January 28th, at that point, I believe you said you agreed to sign a safety plan with the family?
Yes, sir.
And as a part of that safety plan, the guns would be kept in a safe location away from the children?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Ms. Suit Hall, I'm approaching you with what has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 70. If you'll take a look at that document and tell me if you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
What is that, ma'am?
It's a North Carolina safety assessment. A safety assessment is something we do with every family that we meet. We have to indicate if there is any concern that we have about the safety of the children and indicate what it specifically is the concern and how is the family going to take steps to make sure that that concern is alleviated.
And is this document, the one I've showed you, State's Exhibit 70, is it the assessment plan for the Taylor family?
It's a copy of it, yes.
Copy of it. And this document, was it executed or signed by you and then also members of the Taylor family?
Yes, sir.
And taking a look at that document, do there appear to be any changes or alterations to it other than it being a copy?
No, sir.
And is this type of document kept in the regular course of business there with the Child Protective Service?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 70 into evidence.
Any objection? It's allowed.
Now, in looking at this document, Ms. Suit Hall, it appears that the date report received is indicated as January 3rd of 2014. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So that's the date in which this case became active with your agency?
Yes, sir.
And then the date itself for this plan, and it has kind of faded a little bit, but appears to be January 28th of 2014.
Yes, sir.
So that's the date in which you had the home visit with Mr. Sylvester Taylor, and was Angelia present as well?
Yes, she was.
And how about Latanya?
Yes, she was.
In going through this safety assessment, I think you mentioned that you're looking to see if there are any physical or emotional or concerns regarding the family, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And before we start talking about the gun issue itself, just starting here with number one, when you say caregiver in any situation, who are you referring to specifically in regards to this plan?
In this particular plan, it was Miss Allen, who was then known as Miss Holden, and Sylvester and Anglia Taylor.
So the Taylor, well, Latanya and the Taylor grandparents are the caregivers in this situation.
Yes, sir.
And under this situation, were there any indications in section 1 of this safety assessment that there were any physical concerns or safety concerns for the children?
No, I did indicate that I referred to a separate section, which is Part B, safety factor description.
Okay. But in section 1, where it's dealing with caregivers' current behavior is violent or out of control, you said no to that.
That's correct.
And then all other caregiver has caused serious harm to the child, you said no to that.
Correct.
Everything in the first section regarding the safety and welfare of the children at that point is checked as no.
Correct.
So you had no safety concerns.
Right.
And then, as you said, in section 2 or part B of the safety plan, you did make a note regarding the allegation regarding the gun, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And in part B there, if you'll just read there for the members of the jury what your concern was or what factor you described.
My concern was that Sylvester Taylor had been accused of pointing a gun at Jeremy.
And at that point, you used the word accused. Was there a reason why you chose that specific word?
I was a little uncertain as to whether it had actually happened.
Overruled. She can explain why she used the word accused.
If you'll explain why you used the words accused.
I still needed to talk more with the family about what was going on with Jeremy. He was clearly becoming more and more agitated about the separation and whether or not he stayed with his dad or his mom. His mom had said that he had started being more aggressive, that he had been lying a little bit, that she didn't think. Most people in the family denied that there had been a gun except for Jeremy. So, but that did not mean that I didn't pay attention to what Jeremy said. So because of what Jeremy said, we did do the safety plan that said that Mr. Taylor had been accused of pointing a gun at him.
And at that point, had you had the opportunity to review the police record from the Wake County Sheriff's Office?
I had not. I did request it later in the day and got a copy of it and called Ms. Holden about it. I may be wrong, but I think I got it that same day.
So to the best of your recollection, you weren't even aware of the Wake County Sheriff's Office Deputy Edwards report at that point?
Other than what Ms. Allen had told me.
But then in section 2 of this document, that's entitled the safety response. What was the same agreed upon?
That Mr. Taylor agreed not to have any weapons around the children.
And Leah Taylor and Latanya all signed this document as well as yourself.
They did.
And is that right? Where it's dated January 28th, 2014 for you, Sylvester, and Anglia, and then it appears Latanya signed on January 29th.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. After the safety plan with the Taylor family, did you make Mr. Holden, the defendant, aware of that?
I did. I called him later that afternoon to tell him that a safety plan was in place.
And at that point, what did Mr. Holden tell you in regards to the safety plan?
I told him what the safety plan said and that that was standard for any child in this particular situation. Good enough. To do whatever he thought was necessary if he felt that his children were not safe in the Taylor home, but that the county had deemed them safe. He said that wasn't good enough. He initially said that he had already filed an emergency custody order, but then said he would call me back. He hung up, and I never heard from him again.
And then it appears, Ms. Suthall, that your next involvement in the case is that you were made aware that Mr. Holden, the defendant, had filed an emergency custody order. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And how did you learn about that?
I received a message from Miss Allen on January 31st telling me that he had gotten the emergency custody order.
So that was just a message, and then were you actually able to talk to Miss Allen?
I talked with her. I had been on vacation, and I talked to her on February 3rd.
And at that point, did she make you aware that the children had been taken from her custody?
Yes.
And do you remember kind of what her demeanor was or emotions was?
She was very upset, very upset.
At that point, Ms. Suthall, were you also made of another, I guess, concern with Jeremy?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that concern?
Miss Allen told me that Jeremy had gone to see Sharon Hartzog, the therapist, and had told her that.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I need to take up this matter. There's another matter I need to take up with counsel. I'll ask you to stay in the deliberation room for a few moments while we address these matters. Please leave your notepads in the chairs and don't talk about the case among yourselves. Outside the presence of the jury, we're going to take up your issue, but there's another matter that I just wanted to bring to your attention and that we may need to take up as well at this time. We received a report from someone not involved in the trial, who's actually in the back of the courtroom now, that during the last break, a spectator who was in the courtroom, who's not in the courtroom now, approached a juror, perhaps in the snack bar area, and attempted to speak with that juror. And I don't know whether there was any contact at all or anything inappropriate occurred other than a spectator attempting to approach a juror. But I wanted to bring that to your attention that we received that report. I have the gentleman seated in the back here if we need to inquire further about that. And I'll be happy to bring him up and find out more about what was involved if I think that's probably appropriate. So, sir, would you mind coming forward?
No.
And then you can step down, please. I'll ask you to come have a seat in the witness box.
Yes, sir.
Just so that way everybody can see you and ask questions if need be. Yes, sir. Would you mind just telling us what your name is, sir?
Yes, my name is Evan Crossgrove.
Yes, sir. And would you mind just telling us what you saw, sir?
Yes, downstairs in the snack bar during recess, there's a gentleman who has been here since the beginning this morning, approached two members of the family and a juror downstairs while she was getting coffee. I did not hear the context of the conversation, but he was trying to talk to her. And I had asked the members of the family if he was making them uncomfortable, and they said that he had made some remarks to them, saying something to the effect of, this was really boring. How could you stay awake? And after speaking to the members of the family, I asked, would you like me to say something to a deputy or to bring it to the attention of the court? And they seemed to think that was a good idea, so that's what I did.
And with respect to the juror, were you able to see whether the juror actually engaged in a conversation with this individual?
It did not appear so, but I was standing far enough away where I couldn't hear, but it appeared as though she had her back turned towards him.
All right. Okay. And can you describe the juror? Do you know which number or where this juror is seated?
She was sitting in the back row, I believe the third seat from the right. She's wearing a green jacket and has purple hair.
Okay. All right. I think we can figure that out.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And you couldn't hear what he may have been trying to say to her. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And is this the gentleman? I think I know who you're talking about. He was wearing I think a black suit, had a backpack with him. Is that?
Yeah, it was either a dark blue or black suit. He was also had a backpack and a hat.
Right. Right. And I believe the bailiff engaged in some conversation with him this morning that he apparently came in this morning to observe the trial and is no longer here, but stayed, I think, until the first break. But that's, I've not seen him any other time in the courtroom. All right, very good. Thank you so much for reporting this to us, sir. We certainly appreciate you bringing this to our attention.
Ask one question.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if Mr. Casco, if he could identify his role.
Are you involved? What can you tell us how you're
Sure. I'm an intern for Judge Griffin. I'm a student at Campbell Law, and today he said that he didn't really have anything for me to see, but suggested that I go to another courtroom to observe proceedings.
Very good.
And if I could ask a question,
Yes.
Your Honor. So are the family members that were approached by this person, are they in the courtroom now?
Yes, sir. They are.
And which, are they family members of the victims or the defendant?
Can you just point generally to people that you're
Yes.
referring to?
Right here behind the woman in the purple jacket, and then on the left side, the woman with the scarf.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much, sir. We certainly
Thank you.
appreciate it. All right, counsel. I certainly could bring out juror number 4, I believe, is the juror that's being referred to, and make an inquiry whether there's anything about that encounter that she even heard or anything that might impair her ability to continue to evaluate this case solely on what she hears in this courtroom. And I'm happy to do that out of abundance of caution.
I don't have a problem with that, but I would not want to say that that constituted the opening of the door.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't sound like it's a participant in the trial, but I guess if they spectated even a part of the proceedings, that you'd need to make that inquiry over. So I think that's fine.
All right.
We have no objections to making an inquiry.
I think out of abundance of caution, I'll make the inquiry. It sounded like, again, I'm not overly concerned about the nature of the communication if it was the same thing that the witness just described he heard said to the family. But if there's something more, then we at least ought to know about it so that we can evaluate it. So, bailiff, would you bring juror number 4 in, please?
That's correct.
conversation with the jurors, it would be my inclination that there need not be anything done with respect to this jury, no further action taken with respect to them. I certainly would be interested in speaking with Nicholas again if he happens to come by, but as far as any further disruption for us, I think we probably have that under control. Mr. Brown?
A thought occurs to me, and I don't know if it's necessary, whether to say that it appears that he's not associated with either party. I don't know whether telling the jurors that would be helpful or not. I just throw that out as a suggestion.
All right. I'll be glad to mention that, and perhaps I'm going to bring them back in briefly and then send them to lunch, and I'll just, when I recite the rule about reminding them not to let anybody talk about this case with them, I'll urge them to report any possible violations of that rule to us right away so we can deal with it, and also just inform the jurors that the individual who we've had some concern about is not associated with any party. That's fine. All right.
Your Honor, one more matter before
Yes.
we come back out. Ms. Sudol's still on direct. We've got another witness that has some pretty significant medical issues, and so we would ask to take him out of order and interrupt her testimony at 2:30. We'll have him here right at 2:30, I believe, and we can put him, he's one of those 10, 15-minute witnesses. We can get him on and off, and then we'd ask Ms. Sudol could then come back on.
Any objection?
And that's Carl Staten.
All right. And we can take up the issue, the objection. We can either take that up right at 2:30 before we resume, or we can take it up right when before Ms. Sudol resumes her seat. But we will take it up.
I don't know how long it's going to take. I'd like to hear Mr. Brown's objection on it, and
Okay.
that may be dispositive of how we
All right,
proceed
well,
on it. So
why
it may
don't you-
not take very long.
All right. Why don't you tell me the basis of the objection?
I believe, if I am correct, she's about to testify about allegations that Mr. Holden smoked marijuana with Jeremy. And our basis is, unlike other things that she's testified, this is something that neither JT or Ms. Allen talked about at all. And yeah, okay.
All right, that's fine. That's why I didn't think it would take very long.
Okay.
All right. Very good. Well, let's bring the jurors back in, and we'll go ahead and send them to lunch. bring you in just to excuse you to go to lunch, but I wanted to, with respect to the rules I've asked you to follow and to not talk about this case or allow anyone to talk with you about it. As you can tell, we just had a very brief inquiry about a concern we had that someone who is not connected with any party in this case, but is simply a courtroom observer, attempted to communicate with several jurors, and we greatly appreciate the information we received on that. And you should feel free to report any concern that you have like that to the deputy so that we can take measures to make sure that it doesn't happen. We want to make sure that you are not approached by anyone, that no one attempts to discuss this case with you or in any way makes you uncomfortable or even questions your ability to comply with all these rules. So with all of that being said, I'll ask you to continue to follow these rules to the letter. Please don't talk about this case among yourselves or with anyone else. Have no conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers, no media or independent investigation in these matters. Don't form or express any opinions about this, and no independent investigation. I did have one question for juror number 6 I neglected to ask. At the time you were riding the elevator this morning, were you wearing your jury badge?
It's beneath my jacket.
Beneath your jacket, so not visible?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, very good. You go to lunch, return at 2:30, please. Leave your notebooks.